Ever feel like your emotions are playing whack-a-mole with you, like you're always one step behind?
Mm.
Today, we're going to take a deep dive into this whole world of emotional health.
Yeah.
We've got a ton of your sources here, articles, research, even some personal notes. We're ready to unpack it all.
Sounds good.
So we'll uncover what emotional health really means, how to actually recognize when it needs a little tune-up,
Right.
and some real strategies to build up that inner resilience.
It really is like having a garden, you know?
Oh,
You
well,
can't just like hope for the best, right?
yeah.
You got to tend to it.
Yeah.
You got to nurture it. Got to give it the right conditions to actually thrive.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So speaking of tending to our emotional gardens,
Mm-hmm.
let's just start with the basics. We hear so much about being emotionally healthy, but what does that even look like in real life, day to day?
Yeah, you're right. You hear it all the time. And I think there's this misconception that it's all about like being happy all the time,
Right, right.
which, let's face it, is just not realistic. Emotional health, it's less about feeling good 24/7
Yeah.
and more about just being aware of your emotions,
Okay.
developing those healthy coping mechanisms to actually, navigate the ups and downs.
So it's less about avoiding those negative emotions altogether
Yeah,
and more about having the tools to deal with them when they inevitably pop up.
exactly. Because they are going to pop up.
Oh, yeah.
It's about recognizing that emotions, even the unpleasant ones,
Yeah,
they're just a natural part of being human.
they are. So how do we know then if our emotional health needs a little TLC?
Mm-hmm.
What are some signs that things might be, I don't know, a little out of whack?
Well, one big one is something called emotional dysregulation.
Okay.
And basically, it's when you find yourself overreacting to situations that wouldn't normally faze you,
I see.
like spilling your coffee or hitting a red light, little things.
Oh, I've definitely been there. You're running late and that spilled coffee feels like the end of the world.
Exactly. Or you might find yourself struggling to even pinpoint exactly what you're feeling.
Mm.
It's like this general sense of unease,
Yeah,
maybe feeling overwhelmed,
right.
but you just can't quite put your finger on why.
And that's where understanding the impact of trauma becomes so important, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely.
I was really struck by that study that you shared with me about how trauma can actually rewire the brain's emotional processing centers.
Yeah, it's not just a matter of getting over something.
Right.
Trauma, it can create these really deep-seated patterns
Oh, yeah.
in the way we respond to stress and
Right.
how we regulate our emotions.
Okay.
It's like, imagine this. You're just walking down the street
Okay.
and you hear a car backfire.
Yeah.
Now, for someone who's experienced a car accident,
Right.
that sound, it might trigger a full-blown panic attack.
Wow.
Even if, logically they know they're safe in that moment.
So it's like those past experiences, they can almost linger in our nervous system, making it harder to tell the difference between real danger
Right.
and just something we're perceiving as a threat.
Exactly. And you know what? That's actually where mindfulness can be so helpful.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in like a fluffy self-help kind of way,
Right.
but as this powerful tool to actually reclaim that control over our emotional responses.
Mindfulness, okay, I'll admit it. It always sounded to me like something you do, I don't know, on a yoga mat in like a silent room.
Yeah.
But after reading that study about how even like short mindfulness exercises can actually change our brainwave patterns,
You're pretty cool, yeah.
I'm starting to see it less as like esoteric and more like emotional weightlifting, if that makes sense.
Totally.
So what's the science behind it? And how can it help someone regain control after, say, something like a trauma?
You are spot on with that weightlifting analogy. It really is. Because mindfulness at its core, it's really about building that mental muscle, to be able to observe our thoughts and our feelings without getting like swept away by them. It's like, think of it this way. Trauma, it can make us want to just like avoid anything that even reminds us of that experience.
Right. Avoid, avoid, avoid.
Exactly. But when we practice mindfulness, it's like we're training ourselves to actually approach those difficult emotions.
Yeah.
But with a sense of curiosity and compassion instead of fear and avoidance.
It's like we're creating a space where those emotions can exist,
Yeah,
but they're not hijacking our whole system.
exactly.
We're not erasing the past, but we're learning to kind of be in the present moment with more, I don't know, awareness.
Precisely. And you mentioned something earlier that I thought was really interesting about self-care, sometimes feeling like just another thing on the never-ending to-do list. I hear that a lot from people, but it really doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
So what are your thoughts about self-care, especially when we're talking about navigating a world that often feels, well, very digitally driven?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
we got that great comment from Gemma, our listener, and she was wondering, how do we balance staying connected in this tech-heavy world
Mm-hmm.
with protecting our, emotional well-being?
It's a good question, and honestly.
It's something I really struggle with, too.
Yeah.
My screen time report is not pretty.
Yeah. I think it's a valid concern, and Gemma is definitely not alone.
No,
I mean, we're carrying around these little dopamine dispensers with us everywhere we go.
they really are.
And listen, it's not about demonizing technology, right? It's more about just being mindful of how it's actually impacting us.
So it's like, how do we get the benefits of technology
Right.
without it becoming this constant source of comparison or distraction?
Right.
Or just, information overload?
Totally. It's about setting those boundaries,
Okay.
scheduling actual tech-free time, being more selective about what we're consuming online. Like, are we following accounts that uplift us and inspire us? Or are we just kind of fueling that comparison game?
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, sometimes those notifications can wait.
They really can.
It's important. Give ourselves permission to disconnect and actually recharge.
Speaking of connection, Gemma also asked about nurturing those real-life relationships.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting. And, it's so easy to approach self-care as this, I don't know, solo mission.
Right.
But the relationships we have, they play a huge role in our emotional well-being too, don't they?
Yeah.
It's so true. We all need that reminder sometimes that we're not in this alone,
We're not.
Having those people that you can really be yourself with,
Yeah.
flaws and all, that's huge.
It makes a difference.
It really does. But it got me thinking about something else Gemma said,
Okay.
about the link between our emotions and creativity.
Yeah.
I don't know. I never really thought about those two things as going together.
It's interesting, right? Because for so long we've been taught to think about emotions as this
Yeah.
messy, unpredictable thing,
Yeah.
something that just gets in the way of logic and reason. But what we're learning is that emotions are actually this wellspring of creative energy.
So instead of like, don't let your emotions cloud your judgment,
Right.
it's more like, hey, maybe those emotions are trying to tell you something.
Exactly. I mean, think about those songs that give you goosebumps or paintings that take your breath away.
Oh, yeah?
Those aren't just technical masterpieces.
Right.
They're infused with raw human emotion.
Totally.
They resonate with us on a totally different level.
So how do we tap into that?
Yeah.
It's not like we can just snap our fingers and be, I don't know, more emotionally available.
Right.
Especially after going through something like a trauma.
Yeah. It's definitely a process. And
Yeah.
it's not about forcing it either,
Right.
It's about creating the space for those emotions to just kind of emerge authentically.
Okay.
Maybe it's journaling. Maybe it's losing yourself in music. Maybe it's trying a new creative outlet.
Right.
The key is to be open, open to exploring those emotions without judgment.
So it's not about being overly emotional. It's
Yeah.
more about honoring those emotions as a source of insight,
Yeah.
inspiration even.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance
Right. Yeah.
between being in touch with our emotions, but also having the tools to regulate them effectively.
Well said. If there's one big takeaway from our deep dive today, it's that emotional health, well, it's a journey.
It is.
It's about building self-awareness, building resilience, nurturing those support systems. It's about giving ourselves permission to feel our feelings,
Yes.
all of them,
All of them.
and then finding those healthy ways to express them.
Beautifully put. And, it's important to remember you are not alone on this journey. There's always support available. And even those small steps, they can lead to really significant positive changes over time.
They can.
Yeah.
Now, here's something I want you to think about. You mentioned how our emotions influence creativity.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what about the other way around? How does creativity itself contribute to our emotional well-being? Head over to our website and let us know what you think, because we'd love to hear your take on it. Until next time, keep exploring and keep diving deep.